The ballroom was dazzling with crystal chandeliers, golden lights dripping like liquid over the faces of the city's wealthiest elite. Waiters glided across the marble floor with trays of champagne, while businessmen in tailored suits leaned in close to whisper their ambitions. Everyone was here for one reason: the long-anticipated billion-dollar merger between Crestwood Technologies and the Ryan Global. At the heart of it all stood Miranda Voss, CEO of Crestwood, a woman whose presence commanded attention. Her heels clicked sharply as she moved, her sleek black dress and diamond necklace casting her as untouchable royalty in the corporate world. Every investor and partner here had their eyes fixed on her, except for the guest who was being ignored. At one end of the hall, seated awkwardly near the buffet, was a man no one bothered to acknowledge. His suit was impeccable, his silver hair brushed back with precision, but his eyes revealed a quiet struggle. He scanned the crowd with sharp intelligence, yet each time someone tried to speak to him, his gaze faltered. Words reached him like broken fragments, muffled echoes that made no sense. His name was Alexander Duval, an investor from Europe, and he was deaf. Though he had come with every intention of signing a historic deal, no one seemed to have prepared for the fact that he could not hear. "Can you believe this?" one executive whispered to another as they clinked glasses. "They invited a man who can't even participate in the conversation?" "It's awkward," another replied. "No translator? No aid? How does he expect to negotiate?" Miranda glanced at Alexander occasionally, her perfectly painted lips tightening. She had been informed briefly of his condition, but the company had been too busy preparing glossy presentations and financial projections to arrange proper accommodations. And now, as laughter echoed and deals were whispered in corners, the man who could finalize everything sat alone, invisible in a room full of power. In the corner of the room, unnoticed by almost everyone, stood Elena, one of the hotel maids assigned to keep the ballroom pristine. She wore her black uniform with a white apron, carrying a tray of empty glasses. Her 12-year-old daughter Sophia had begged to accompany her mother tonight. Though Elena had protested, the supervisor finally allowed Sophia to stay, on the condition that she stayed out of sight. Sophia was small, with big, curious eyes that darted around the glittering room. She clutched a book under her arm, one filled with scribbled notes and signs she had been teaching herself since she was 8. Unlike most children, Sophia had always been fascinated by communication, gestures, expressions, and particularly sign language. Her neighbor had been deaf, an older man who had taught her the basics, and she'd since spent hours secretly practicing. Now, standing behind a pillar, Sophia noticed the man at the buffet. Something about the loneliness in his eyes struck her. She watched as people smiled politely, then turned away in frustration when he failed to respond. His fingers twitched as though he longed to sign, but no one understood. Her mother returned to collect more glasses, and Sophia whispered, "Mama, that man over there, he can't hear them." Elena glanced briefly, sighing. "Yes, Sophia, but that is not our concern. These are important people. Don't stare." But Sophia couldn't stop. When Alexander tried to greet a group of businessmen, they awkwardly chuckled, patted his shoulder, and walked away. She saw his jaw clench, his hand gripping his glass until his knuckles turned white. Finally, he stood and moved toward Miranda, determined to make himself known. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a tablet, typing quickly. Miranda accepted it with an elegant smile, but as her eyes skimmed the message, she grew tense. "He wants clarity on the revenue models," she whispered to her assistants. "But this is taking too long. We can't negotiate through typing all night." The assistant nodded, unimpressed. Maybe he shouldn't be part of this deal if communication is impossible. Alexander caught the shift in their expressions. Though he couldn't hear, he was no fool. He saw the impatience, the subtle dismissal. His chest tightened with anger. After traveling halfway across the world for this, was he simply to be ignored? Sophia, still peeking from her hiding spot, felt her heart racing. She couldn't stand it any longer. Clutching her book, she took a small step forward. At that moment, Alexander retreated, setting his untouched drink on a table and moving toward the exit doors.
His face was a mask of calm, but his eyes betrayed years of frustration, the familiar burn of being underestimated, dismissed. He had every intention of leaving. And that was when Sophia ran to him. "Wait," she said softly, though she knew he couldn't hear. She tapped gently on his sleeve. Alexander turned, his expression softening at the sight of the little girl. He gave a small, confused smile, nodding as though to say, "Yes, what is it?" Sophia hesitated, then raised her hands. Slowly, carefully, she signed, "Hello, are you okay?" For a moment, Alexander froze. The crowded ballroom faded from his mind. He stared at her wide-eyed, as though he wasn't sure he had seen it correctly. His lips parted slightly, and then, with trembling hands, he signed back. You know sign language?" Sophia beamed, her hands moving quickly though clumsily. "A little. I learned from a neighbor. You seem sad." And just like that, Alexander laughed. A soundless laugh, but his entire body shook with relief. His stern businessman's mask cracked open, replaced with raw humanity. For the first time that night, someone had spoken to him in his language. But soon, others began to notice. Miranda, sipping champagne, saw Alexander animatedly gesturing with the maid's daughter. Confused murmurs spread across the room. "Who is that girl? What is happening?" Alexander suddenly motioned for paper and pen. With Sophia's help translating bits in sign, he scribbled detailed figures, corrections, and concerns that no one had bothered to listen to earlier. Miranda's assistant, trying to intervene, was waved off by Alexander himself. Instead, he insisted Sophia continue. Miranda's jaw clenched, but curiosity forced her to watch. She noticed something striking. Through the girl, Alexander wasn't just negotiating, he was opening possibilities no one else had thought of. His insights were sharp, his analysis revolutionary. By the time the night waned, what had started as a humiliating evening transformed into something far more significant. Deals shifted. Conversations recentered around Alexander, who now spoke through the unlikely interpreter at his side. Sophia, glowing with determination, became the voice no one expected. And as the final contracts were laid on the table, signed with trembling pens, the sum was spoken out loud. $1 billion. The room erupted in disbelief. And yet, in the center of it all, a deaf man smiled for years, and a maid's daughter held her head high, realizing she had just changed the course of lives forever.
The deal was signed, but the champagne glasses clinked a little differently that night. For some, it was a triumph, a billion-dollar merger that would be remembered in the industry. For others, it was humiliation, especially for Miranda Voss. She had spent months preparing presentations, wooing investors, and carefully crafting her image as the visionary who could lead Crestwood into the future. Yet, when the cameras flashed and the press whispered, the story was not about her brilliance. It was about the deaf guest who almost left, and the maid's daughter who brought him back. At first, Miranda forced herself to smile. She posed for photographs beside Alexander, her arm grazing his, pretending that everything had gone according to plan. But behind her eyes, a storm was brewing. "Unbelievable," her assistant hissed when the crowd thinned. "Do you realize what people are saying? That a child saved the deal? That Crestwood nearly collapsed because no one thought to accommodate him?" Miranda's jaw tightened. They won't remember the girl. They'll remember the merger. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure. Across the ballroom, Alexander sat with Sophia and her mother. Elena, nervous and out of place among glittering gowns, tried to keep her daughter quiet. But Alexander had insisted they stay. His hands moved with ease, his face alive with expression as he told Sophia stories of his travels, of cities where skyscrapers glowed like fire, of villages where children had taught him new signs. Sophia laughed, her small hands flying in response. Elena could only watch, half in awe, half in fear. What would people think if they saw her daughter in the center of such an elite circle? "Sir," Elena said softly, bowing her head, "she should not bother you. She is only a child." Alexander signed quickly, looking directly at Sophia. "You are not a bother. You are the only one who listened." When Sophia translated, her mother's eyes welled with tears. Miranda approached, her heels striking the marble like thunderclaps. "Mr. Duval," she said smoothly, though she knew he couldn't hear, "perhaps we can discuss details privately now." But Alexander shook his head, signing something to Sophia. "He says that if you want to discuss, I must stay." Miranda's smile faltered. A maid's daughter dictating terms to her? Her pride flared, but Alexander's stare was unyielding. She swallowed her anger, masking it with charm. Of course, if that is his wish. The days that followed only deepened the divide. The media swarmed with headlines. Ignored guest, billion-dollar deal saved by a 12-year-old interpreter, and, when the rich were silent, the maid's daughter spoke. Photographs of Sophia sitting beside Alexander went viral, her wide eyes and determined hands frozen in the glow of camera flashes. At Crestwood headquarters, whispers filled the halls. "Did you hear? A child handled negotiations better than the board?" "Miranda is furious. She was upstaged by a maid's kid." Still, Alexander trusts the girl more than anyone else now. Imagine the influence she has. Miranda called an emergency meeting. She sat at the head of the polished oak table, her voice sharp as glass. "This child," she said, "cannot become the face of our success. Do you understand? We are the ones who built this company. If we allow this story to continue, we'll look like fools." Her legal advisor cleared his throat. "With respect, Miss Voss, Alexander Duval has made it clear he will only negotiate further if the girl is present. Removing her now could jeopardize everything." Miranda's nails dug into the armrest. "She's a distraction, nothing more. We'll handle this our way." But fate had other plans. A week later, another negotiation round was scheduled at Crestwood headquarters. This time, Alexander arrived flanked not by lawyers, but by Sophia and her mother. The security guards almost stopped them at the door until Alexander himself intervened, signing furiously until they were allowed through. Inside the conference room, the tension was thick. Miranda's executives shifted uncomfortably as Sophia climbed onto a chair, her legs dangling as she sat beside Alexander. The meeting began, and once again it was Sophia who bridged the worlds. Alexander's ideas flowed through her hands into words the board could understand. He proposed innovations in renewable technology, strategies for market expansion, and ethical practices that stunned even the most seasoned executives. At times, Sophia struggled to keep up, her small hands trembling with the speed of his signing. Elena would squeeze her shoulder, whispering encouragement, but Sophia never backed down. She translated every word with a fire in her eyes, determined not to let him down. When the meeting ended, silence filled the room. Even Miranda's most skeptical advisors were impressed. Alexander arose, shook hands, and left with Sophia at his side. The executives murmured after he was gone. "She's extraordinary. She could be the future of interpreting. And to think, she's just 12. Miranda said nothing, but her blood boiled. That evening, she sat alone in her glass-walled office, staring at the skyline. Her reflection glared back at her, cold, humiliated. She poured herself a glass of wine and whispered, "No child is going to steal my legacy." Meanwhile, Sophia lay in her small bed, the glow of city lights seeping through the window. Her book of signs rested beside her. She thought of Alexander's smile, of how his eyes lit up whenever she translated. For the first time in her life, she felt like she mattered, like she could shape something bigger than herself. Her mother kissed her forehead. "Mi pequeña," Elena whispered. "Do you know what you've done? You changed everything." Sophia smiled sleepily. "Mama, I just listened." But the world was already listening too. By the next morning, invitations arrived. Schools, foundations, and even television stations wanted Sophia's story. She was no longer invisible. Neither was Alexander, whose reputation soared as the investor who trusted the unlikeliest interpreter. And somewhere in the shadows, Miranda Voss began planning her revenge. The weeks after the deal were filled with whispers, applause, and shadows. Sophia's story had spread beyond the city, beyond the boardrooms. Newspapers called her the little girl who spoke a billion-dollar language. Parents signed their children up for sign language classes. Schools invited her to speak. But while the world celebrated, inside Crestwood's towers, Miranda Voss grew colder. She was no longer the centerpiece of the story. Investors who once praised her brilliance now praised Alexander's vision. Journalists asked more about the girl interpreter than about the CEO. To Miranda, it was humiliation disguised as success. One evening, as rain streaked across her office window, she called her assistant. "Find me something," she said. "Anything. If that girl becomes Crestwood's mascot, I lose control. I want her gone." The assistant hesitated. "She's a child, Miranda. Public opinion, then we'll make sure public opinion turns against her," Miranda snapped. Her voice was sharp enough to silence him. "Every story has a flaw. Find hers." Meanwhile, Sophia's life was changing in ways she barely understood. At school, children who once ignored her now crowded her desk. Teachers praised her for her courage. Even her tiny apartment seemed brighter, as though the world had cracked open to let sunlight in. But her mother worried. "Elena," said her friend Marisol one night as they folded laundry together, "this is dangerous. The rich, they don't like being embarrassed. Your girl made them look like fools." Elena frowned. "She only did what was right. Why would anyone hate her for that?" Marisol gave her a knowing look. "Because people with power protect their pride. Be careful." The warning came true sooner than anyone expected. A week later, Crestwood announced a formal press conference to celebrate the merger. Miranda herself extended the invitation to Alexander, and to everyone's surprise, Sophia. Elena hesitated, but Alexander encouraged them. "You must come," he signed. "You deserve to stand beside me." The day of the conference, cameras flashed like lightning storms. The hall was filled with reporters, investors, and politicians. At the front, Miranda stood at the podium, immaculate in a tailored suit, her voice rich and commanding. "Today," she declared, "Crestwood and Orion Global begin a new chapter. This merger will shape the future of technology and bring opportunities across the globe." Polite applause followed. But then she gestured toward Alexander. "And of course, none of this would be possible without our esteemed partner, Mr. Duval." Alexander rose, smiling warmly, and Sophia quickly joined him. She stood small but steady, ready to translate his words. The cameras turned eagerly toward her. That was when Miranda struck. "Before we proceed," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I think it is important for the world to know the truth. This child, while remarkable, has been given more credit than she deserves. After all, can a 12-year-old truly understand billion-dollar negotiations? Can we trust that her translations were accurate? Or," her eyes gleamed like knives, "or has this all been a convenient performance?" The room gasped. Reporters scribbled furiously. Elena's hands shook as she clutched her daughter's arm. Miranda continued, smiling with poisonous grace. "It is not about questioning him. It is about protecting the company from liability. She is a child. Children make mistakes. Imagine if billions were lost because a girl wanted to play interpreter." The cruelty cut deep. Sophia's eyes stung with tears. She wanted to run, to hide. But then she felt Alexander's hand on her shoulder. He leaned down, signing slowly, his eyes locked with hers. "Do not let her silence you. You are stronger than you know." The words lit a fire inside Sophia. She straightened, wiped her tears, and stepped forward. Her small voice trembled, then grew steady as she spoke, not translating this time, but speaking for herself. "You ignored him, all of you. You treated him like he didn't matter because you couldn't understand him. But I listened, not because I'm special, not because I'm smarter, but because I cared. I didn't just hear his words, I saw him. And if that's a crime, then I'm guilty." The room was frozen. Reporters leaned forward, cameras flashing like fireflies. Alexander stood tall beside her, his hands moving with fierce determination. Sophia signed back, her movements bold and clear for the cameras to see. "He says the only mistake was yours, Miss Voss, not hiring a translator, not preparing, not caring. You ignored him, and I will never forget that." The hall erupted. Some clapped, others shouted questions, but one thing was certain. The narrative had shifted again. Miranda's face was pale, her smile cracked. For the first time in years, she looked small. By the end of the day, the headlines were merciless. "Child outsmarts CEO in public showdown," and "Deaf investor defends young interpreter against corporate bullying." Investors began questioning Miranda's leadership, and within weeks, whispers of her resignation filled the corridors. As for Sophia, her life transformed once more. Universities offered scholarships, advocacy groups reached out, asking her to help spread awareness about accessibility and inclusion, but she remained the same curious, wide-eyed girl, clutching her book of signs and scribbles. One evening, as she sat on the rooftop of their apartment, watching the city lights flicker, Alexander joined her. He signed slowly, deliberately, so she could understand every word. "You gave me more than a voice. You gave me dignity. The world will try to make you small, but never forget, you are already larger than life." Sophia smiled, her hands moving with newfound confidence. "I didn't do it alone. You believed in me." Her mother stood behind them, tears glistening in her eyes. For the first time, she no longer saw her daughter as just a child, but someone who had the power to shape the world. In the distance, Crestwood's towering building gleamed. But its throne was shaken, and a new legacy had begun, not built by wealth, not by status, but a girl who refused to stay silent. And though the billion-dollar deal had changed industries, it was Sophia's voice, spoken and signed, that truly changed hearts.